to do that, Mike. Yeah, I don't have to lean forward.
No, we're starting. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Angela Uhas and I'll be your webinar moderator today. Today, as you can see on your screen, we're covering telematics in Australian heavy vehicles and where to from here. Our presenters today are Simon Humphries and Dr. Charles Carl of ARB Group. That's me again. If you have any webinar related questions or concerns, you can feel free to email or contact me at any time. A few housekeeping matters before we kick off the presentation today. We are going with approximately 1 hour in duration and we're allowing 20 minutes or so for questions. Please don't wait until the end to ask your questions. The webinar is more enjoyable when it's interactive. We are recording today's session, so you don't have to worry too much about taking notes, and this will all be sent to you in an email after the webinar. A few functions of the GoToWebinar system. We have your questions box, which you will all see in your control panel, and if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please do type them in here. You can also raise your hand as per this little icon here if you'd like to get our attention or perhaps respond to a question. Without further ado, I will hand over to Simon Humphries. Thank you for joining me, Simon. Really great to have you here. I appreciate your time. Before we kick off with your presentation, I know there's a couple of poll questions that we wanted to ask our audience. So maybe I'll ask the question and you can introduce yourself while we're waiting for the answers to come through.
Thanks, Angela. Yes, my name's Simon Humphries. I am the Chief Engineer of Product Strategy at Isuzu Australia Limited. And until late last year, I also had quite a degree of involvement with telematics through my role at the time of Chief Technical Officer for the Truck Industry Council. So I'm going to talk today about my understanding of where telematics is in heavy vehicles in Australia in particular, with some examples. And the first question that Angela's put up there is, what is your understanding of telematics? And as Angela said, you don't have to wait until I pause or at some point in the presentation. You can type in your questions in the box.
Absolutely. All right, we've had a couple of responses come through, so we will leave that open for another moment or two while everyone else jumps on board. Thank you very much, Clarissa. ITS is a common response here. ITS devices and systems relevant to heavy vehicles. We've had a few people, well, we've got a bit of a mixed audience actually. We've had a few people say that their understanding is quite good, others are saying it's basic, so we've got a range there. Now, will our presentation today sort of have something for everyone, Simon?
I hope so, but again, you're welcome to ask questions as we go, and Angela will pick up those questions and throw them to myself and to Charles as we go through the prepared presentation. So we're happy to deviate from what we prepared and make it as interactive as possible.
Fantastic. I'm sure people will be happy to hear that. Philip has made a comment. Telematics, the use of instrumentation and data linking aid in monitoring or operating vehicles.
That's a pretty good description.
I think that's quite spot on. Thanks very much, Phil. That's great. Another poll question that everyone can perhaps respond to whilst Simon gets on with his presentation, but this one is covering, can you give an example of telematics currently in use? So once again, we're getting you to type in your answers into the question box. All right, Simon, over to you while those responses come in.
Okay, thanks, Angela. So as I said, I'm going through a prepared presentation, but quite happy to deviate. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the role of telematics in trucks. So we've heard one or two descriptions of what that might be, but essentially telematics is the use of the combination of technology and communications to assist with safety and productivity in vehicles. And the points I have here are that heavy freight vehicles in Australia are just 3% of all vehicles on the road. However, they can extract major productivity and safety benefits from telematics, I believe, and arguably perhaps more than the other 97%. So certainly from a productivity point of view, heavy freight vehicles can get a lot smarter with the use of telematics, and we'll discuss some of those applications today. It's essential for industry and the roads to cope with the growing freight task. Now, the BITRE is a Commonwealth Department bureau which deals in statistics, and they say that the road freight task will grow by 80% from just a couple of years ago to 2030. So that's not quite double, but it's a massive increase in the total road freight task. And of course, we have to work out smart ways to deal with that. And large combinations, things such as B-triples, which are under trial at the moment and emerging, will not have access to large chunks of the road without widespread use of telematics. And one example of that is the Infrastructure Access Program, or IAP.
And in fact, IAP was a very common answer choice there if you have a look at
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
It's probably the telematics application for heavy vehicles that is the most well known in Australia. It's been around for at least 5 years, Charles?
Yes.
Yes. It's been actually in use for over 5 years. So just looking at where telematics is in use now, it is an emerging market, there's no doubt about it. ACA Research recently conducted some surveys, and you can see from this diagram that there's about 35% of trucks and fleets in the country currently using telematics of some description. And then the breakdown of that 35%, 85% of users have more than 25 trucks. So it's to this point being seen as valuable to the larger fleets, and they can perhaps have much more visibility and of their fleets and where they are. It's about 46% in use for fleets of 6 to 25 trucks. But the smaller fleets, the owner-operators, 1 truck to 5 trucks, only about 10% of those are actually using telematics. So there's certainly a great opportunity in the small to medium fleets to expand the use of telematics. But of course they have to see the value in it. Where the telematics systems in use are being used, as you can see on the top right there, 92% of fleets that have telematics are using them primarily for vehicle tracking. But the other uses going in a clockwise direction, navigation around half, fatigue management 39%, and I believe that avenue will certainly grow. Driver performance management is around 36%, and there's another activity that will probably grow. Vehicle performance management is the next in ranking order. Communications with driver and messaging, so taking away the temptation to use the mobile phone when driving and having a simple messaging system is one great application. Traffic route information is another, 25%, and then it goes down to delivery tracking, route planning and scheduling, proof of delivery and order taking. All of those last 4 are an emerging area which will certainly add to productivity in the market. Intelligent transport systems was one, or ITS was an answer from 1 or 2 respondents, and I suppose in many forums the term intelligent transport systems and telematics are used interchangeably, and it covers, ITS covers such a broad field because every year intelligent transport system community worldwide has a World Congress, and they have something like 5,000 to 7,000 people attend, because the activity covering intelligent transport systems is such a broad range. There's the communications people, there's the vehicle people, there's the infrastructure people, there's and a whole range in between. So ITS, using telematics, sensors, dedicated short-range communications to connect vehicles to each other, known as V2V, vehicles to the road infrastructure, V2I, and even to pedestrians with smartphones. It's an emerging area, V2X, will certainly be with us soon. And another area which I can see expanding dramatically over the next 5 years, beyond what we discussed, Intelligent Access Program, or the Infrastructure Access Program, is other government-led programs such as electronic work diaries. And that's one that we'll discuss in more detail.
Sorry, Simon, I might just cut you off there. We've had a question from James. James is asking, will the presentation cover enforcement possibilities of telematics?
That's a very good question, James, and the answer is yes, and that's something that I will touch on, and Charles will certainly expand in quite a lot of detail. So thanks for your question, and hopefully we'll answer it well.
Wonderful. And Kamal here is just asking, are these figures from Australia or worldwide? So I think from a few.
That was Australian research, the statistics that were presented before. And it was conducted early this year, I believe.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Thanks, Kamal and James. I hope we've answered that for you.
So ITS, part of telematics, is part of a suite of active safety features that are emerging in vehicles. The picture you see there shows the orange area, which is the use of simple sensors, which may not even be able to detect movement and objects as far as the driver can see. The yellow area, using more complex sensors, perhaps radar and the like, could be as good as the driver if they have good eyesight. And the green area, which is using communications, much longer range, it can stretch around corners, obviously better than the driver can see and hear. So if we look at a vehicle that is not unusual in the new vehicle market today. Now there's a picture of a car, but you can have this type of technology on board an advanced truck today. Is looking forward, we have forward collision alert. So you have to tilt your head sideways where you can read that. Lane departure warning systems. They tend to use things like radar, 77 gigahertz radar, and also some camera technology, the optical technology. And then just in front of the bumper you can see auto park assist. You've got sensors that can help you to avoid the usual car park collisions, which are very common on cars these days, and again becoming available on trucks. Moving towards the rear of the vehicle, you have blind spot alerts, reverse traffic alerts, again using a type of radar, and then ultrasonic detectors to assist with parking at the rear. And then you have your rear view camera, which I suspect will become either standard in many vehicles or most vehicles, or perhaps even mandatory through regulation very soon. So combining that type of thing with communications is where we're heading. So just quickly looking at the development of ITS and telematics in heavy vehicles. Before 1990, not much was on offer. In fact, the engines we had were pretty much mechanical in nature. And it wasn't until the Detroit Series 60 engine came along in the early 90s that we had electronic controls. And then in the same decade, we had aftermarket fleet management systems linking to external sensors and a whole mishmash of wires across the vehicle. So the early systems used external sensors. And then also in that decade, there was an international protocol. So there was an American standard, the SAE J1939 was established, and in Europe the ISO 11898, which is known as the CAN bus, Controller Area Network bus system. And that really just describes the signals that that are transmitted along the wires in the vehicle. And so you can, instead of running hundreds of wires, you can run a couple of wires with various signals with different addresses to the different devices on the vehicle. And then, of course, in 2000 or so, we had electronic tolling with the example in Melbourne of CityLink. And in the same decade, we started to get GPS tracking available for low cost. And it's important to note that it wasn't until around 1990 that the first GPS satellite was launched. So things have come a long way very quickly. And then in the same decade, the 2000s, fleet management data was being collected and offered perhaps by telemetry, very short range or physical download by plugging in a computer to the truck or the engine. And then after about 2005, we saw the emergence of aftermarket telematics systems offering a lot more comprehensive information real time. And that's because we had the second generation mobile networks emerging and becoming relatively cheap, so data transfer was becoming cheap. In 2007 or so, some of those technologies that we saw on the car picture before started to become available: advanced braking, collision avoidance technologies, and they were becoming available on heavy vehicles. And in 2008, so yeah, just over 5 years ago, the IAP was introduced to most states of Australia. And it became even more flexible just a couple of years ago because systems other than those that were purpose designed to work with IAP became accepted. So these might have been aftermarket telematics systems, mainly for fleet management purposes, but they could satisfy the needs of the IAP. And then in 2013, we saw there's an acronym there, a new one, CITS, that's Cooperative ITS, Intelligent Transport Systems. So trials of vehicles actually talking to each other using that short-range communications began both in the US and Australia and also in Europe. And by 2015, the original manufacturers in Europe in particular have made a decision that they will make connected vehicle technology available either as standard or as a low-cost option from that time. And beyond that, we think that the federal government's plan to look at a completely different charging regime called mass distance location. So you charge how much the vehicle registration or tax is according to its mass, the distance travelled and where it travels. That may come in later this decade or early next decade. So I mentioned CITS, and in simple terms, you have two vehicles there. They can't necessarily see each other, or the drivers can't necessarily see each other, but through the short-range communications, they can warn each other that they're approaching in the same space, and therefore, in theory, avoid a collision.
Isn't that amazing stuff?
Mm.
We did last year ran a webinar on cooperative ITS
Yes.
by David Green, actually, from our group. So some of you might remember back to that presentation.
Excellent. I've stolen a US timeline here because I find it quite interesting. Only just earlier this year, we had NHTSA, which is the National Highway and Transport Safety Administration in the US, make a decision to mandate cooperative ITS or vehicle-to-vehicle communications in light vehicles. And that was delayed from the 2013 timetable slightly, but within a year we expect a similar decision to be made for heavy vehicles in the US. And that's quite a different path that they're following in the US compared to Europe, where I mentioned the manufacturers, the vehicle manufacturers have decided to adopt vehicle-to-vehicle communications. It's the government that's really driving the timetable in North America. And of course, here in Australia, we take a variety of vehicles from both markets and as well as many from Japan. So it'll be interesting to see what our final timetable looks like. The vision that we have, and I believe it's a common vision, certainly Charles and I have on many occasions, for integrated telematics is to avoid a mess in the vehicle and a lot of distraction, but to have one main information screen in the cabin, and the standards for all intelligent transport systems functions will be performance-based and not hardware-specific, so they don't rule out any system that might be available. And of course, it has to be compatible with the in-vehicle unit from the manufacturer, otherwise you're immediately going to two different systems. Or in the case of older trucks, aftermarket systems which can be adapted to work. And one key for an integrated telematics system is that the screen permits or gives access to apps just like your smartphone, your iPhone or Android device for all functions at the appropriate time. So you don't have visibility of everything at once. Again, that would be a major distraction. But when you need the information, it will be displayed on the screen. And the apps, whether they be IAP, work diary, fleet management systems or anything else, run in the background and present the driver with the information as he needs it. So here's an example of quite a neat cabin. It's not an Isuzu, so I'm trying to be generic here, showing one screen and a nice neat dash without being cluttered. That potentially is the way that things might go. Now I'm going to talk about an example local offering that I'm very familiar with. And it's been developed in conjunction with a firm called Directed Electronics, which is an Australian-based firm, and a division of Directed called GridTrack. And they work with a variety of original equipment manufacturers, including my own company, Isuzu Australia. This system integrates many additional functions with an existing digital entertainment satellite navigation unit which is already supplied as standard equipment with the trucks. It extracts useful data from the truck CAN bus architecture, so you can get fuel economy and braking information and a whole range of engine data from that system transmitted remotely. And it can also advise the driver of certain things, and it can obviously alert the fleet manager and dispatcher of certain activities. This is called Isuzu Telematics and has just been launched in recent times. So we describe it as welcome to the era of the connected truck, because it's still a relatively new system in Australian terms. But what it does, as it's described there, it puts the operator in the cabin with his driver providing operational visibility of the vehicle whilst out on the road. There's two levels. One is a slightly more basic system called Isuzu Telematics Connect, and that's actually available for all makes and models of truck. And the Connect Plus system connects to the CAN bus system on the vehicle, and so provides an expanded list of information. This diagram shows essentially how it works. So you have your little Isuzu truck running down the road. It's connected. It is connected firstly to the satellite via the telematics unit on board the vehicle, and that is providing the vehicle position. It is also connected via the wireless Telstra GSM network and transmitting data relating to the vehicle to that system, to the online web servers, and then that information is available in real time and also subsequently to people such as administrators, vehicle managers and dispatchers of vehicles. as well as anyone with the relevant access to the information provided. So you can see we are talking the connected vehicle, and any internet-enabled device is able to look up what is happening with that vehicle at any given time, or indeed the entire fleet of vehicles if they're so equipped. So it's a good time now, as we've been prompted, to have a look at some more questions.
Absolutely. I'll give you a moment to have a sip of water. You poor thing, you've been talking consistently this whole time. At the moment, I just want to address the fact that, yes, we are recording today's webinar. There were a few questions that have come through with respect to that, and we will be sending out the link to the recording after the webinar. So, as I said, you don't have to worry too much about taking notes or anything of the like. We might just move on to the next stage of the presentation then.
Sure. So I'm going to just give an overview of the rest of Isuzu Telematics without trying to make it sound like a sales pitch. It's more about it's the system that I'm very familiar with. It is the way that the market is heading. So I'll give you the try to be not too salesy. Of course, as with most telematics systems, it provides 24/7 vehicle tracking. As we saw, about 92% of users use their systems primarily for vehicle tracking. It provides operational control. It encourages positive driver behaviour and safe practices in their driving operation. It helps to improve fleet utilisation. It can certainly helps the user and the driver to understand fuel usage and perhaps to modify behaviour to improve fuel usage. Geofencing is a term that we'll become very familiar with, but it allows the operator to designate appropriate areas on the map on their web-enabled device and they can receive an alert when the vehicle goes into or out of a fenced area. And that can assist them to see where the vehicle's going, or perhaps to alert them that a vehicle is about to arrive at a certain site. And of course, as with nearly all telematics systems, it allows comprehensive reports, and they can be set up and customized by the operator to extract them manually by going to the website or to receive them by email. And it's also always online. The hardware module is quite small, and it contains quite a lot of built-in technology. It's a plug-and-play type installation, so it's been designed so that it doesn't take a lot of effort to install in the vehicle. But it's also very smart in that it can be updated over the air using the 3G technology on board. It has its own battery backup, so just in case the battery on the vehicle is disconnected at any time. And the number of parameters that are monitored is scalable and variable. I'm not going to go through every dot point on this particular slide, but you can see the specifications. A couple of highlights. You can see on the top right-hand picture the picture of where the unit is installed. It's just behind a section of the dash, and out of the way. It has onboard storage of all the data that would otherwise be transmitted up to 3 months worth. So it's very unlikely that you would need to have 3 months worth on the system, because you should be constantly transmitting that data over the air. But say you were out of the Telstra network for whatever reason for an extended period of time, it can store 3 months worth. And it also has a 3-axis movement sensor, which provides information such as if the vehicle does roll over for some reason, then obviously it would detect that and can send an alert to the operator. If there's a harsh deceleration, which over a threshold would indicate a crash, then again an automatic message could be sent to the operator, and they can investigate for the driver. And so there's a black box functionality. It can record, say, the last 30 seconds before such an event and assist with crash investigation. So that's very useful. There's another couple of features which I just want to highlight. We're looking to connect this Isuzu Telematics system to our standard roadside assist offering, so that when a button is depressed, then the Isuzu Roadside Assist Centre is alerted, and then they can investigate. Obviously, the location of the vehicle would be sent through a message, and then the alert, the panic situation, whatever that might be. It may be a crash, it may just be a situation where they need some assistance, can be investigated. And also what we found is vehicles fitted with telematics units such as this can provide a discounted insurance premium for the operator, because the vehicle is tracked constantly, and it's easy to detect a theft through geofencing and other setups in the system. You can actually get reduced theft reduction or theft excess claims, and so there are some other potential benefits for users applying a telematics system such as Isuzu Telematics.
Simon, do you
Yes.
mind if we just take a
That's
question?
good. Yes.
Give you a chance to take a breather. We've had a great question from Tracy, actually, and she's asking, is there an ability to extend the tracking component of the goods that the truck is carrying? I realise this would be well into the future, but has it been considered?
To extend the tracking component to the goods. I believe some fleets actually do that now, although I think from a cost point of view, if you were to install a telematics system to the goods, they'd have to be quite high value goods to justify the expense. But that's the thing. All technologies of this nature tend to become cheaper over time. I guess the clincher is the cost of data. Yeah. Do you agree, Charles?
Yes, Simon. In some cases, industry track the trailers,
yes,
and not the trucks. Mm-hmm. So some of the big supermarket chains decide that they want to track the trailers. In other cases, industry want to track the containers. And those sorts of tracking involve satellite communication. So there is a unit that's installed at the top of the container, in the corrugations at the top of the container, and it only transmits movement location just the once. So it could be on a ship or it could be on a truck. Mm-hmm. And so there are lots of technologies that track goods as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for your question, Tracy, and for yourselves for answering that. Maybe we might take one more question at this stage. Veronica is asking, can you provide any examples of driving operation and optimising fleet utilisation?
Okay, there's a good example is what we call smart routing. So a telematics unit connected to a multimedia unit in the vehicle that has standard satellite navigation features that I'm sure you're all familiar with. The ability exists, therefore, for the dispatcher to tell the driver, say it's a pickup and delivery where he may have up to, say, 40 deliveries in a day. The dispatcher can send dynamically the address for the next delivery or pickup location without the driver having to stop and find out where he's going and enter the address in his satellite navigation unit. That data can be transmitted to the sat-nav, and guidance, active guidance starting without the driver having to pause or to waste time in entering the data. So, and that can be repeated several times throughout the day and can be changed, of course, as conditions change. So productivity in that case would improve dramatically.
Alrighty. Well, we've had some great questions there. Might let you move on and take some more questions later on.
Sure. Thank you. The next slide that is showing is simply the web interface for the Isuzu Telematics product, and you can see that there's a username and password for obvious reasons. We don't want people accessing data for someone else's truck, but that will allow people with the relevant access to see what's going on. And some more screenshots. You can see you're able to access exactly where the vehicle's been. You can see a trail of oh, that's just automatically going through. That's okay. You saw some pictures there of the trail of the vehicle, so you can have historical information, or you can have live information updated around every 30 seconds. And there's addresses you can zoom in to maps and even see street view in the case of this system. The operator can then get some detailed or summary reports depending on what they want to see. They can export the data into other systems that they may have and to analyze the data. And of course they can schedule the reports to appear daily, weekly, monthly, or any sort of frequency that they want. There's a few more, one more example of a report which contains all instances for a particular vehicle of over revs or over idling, for example. And you can even analyze a crash log in the unfortunate event that a crash happens. Moving on to something that is just around the corner for our system and is available on some aftermarket systems is messaging. So integrating with the multimedia unit in the vehicle, we have just a simple messaging. So we don't want to distract the driver too much, but we have just the ability to touch the screen and acknowledge or to decline some messages. So it might be simply a delivery is required or a collection is required, and they acknowledge simply by touching on that message. And if they click on accept, that is when something like the smart routing that I mentioned could occur, where the address is automatically entered into their sat-nav system, and they go ahead and drive there. So in summary, for the Isuzu Telematics system, it is a comprehensive solution, and it's benchmarked against other aftermarket and OEM products, and therefore it's very similar to that, and perhaps exceeds the features of some other products on the market. It integrates with the existing multimedia unit, which we call Dave, and there's some advantages there, plus also free upgrades to early adopters. We just launched it recently, just a month ago, at the Melbourne Truck and Trailer Show, and there's certainly some additional features under development. That's just a summary of one example, which, as I mentioned, I'm quite familiar with. And we have another pause here for some questions.
Wonderful. Okie dokie. We've had another question from Kamal. Thank you, Kamal. Kamal's asking, have you thought of getting traffic and incident information from road agencies direct to the vehicle cabins via telematics?
We have thought of that, and that's Charles and I were discussing that just earlier. It's certainly something that is front of mind for the road agencies. However, the cost of setting up infrastructure to provide that information to vehicles, at the right time and in the right place is something that I don't think will happen quickly, although it is the ultimate goal.
Charles, was there anything you wanted to add, Charles?
I was going to say that because of the backbone that has been established in the sort of telematics systems that Simon has been talking about, then if everything is connected to a back office at the end, then really the service provider has the opportunity to make use of the existing channels to
True.
the vehicle to deliver that information. And there are some initiatives, Kamal, that are occurring even in WA, where such information is available to the service providers. And then it's just whatever model exists between the sort of services that that service provider would want to transmit that information to their customers.
I guess there's a trial that's about to begin in New South Wales at Wollongong, where some basic traffic information, including road conditions, relating to a particular stretch of road from Port Kembla to the Hume Highway, is being trialled. So there's infrastructure, communication sites transmitting to the in-unit vehicle, or the system in the vehicle, and in real time they can get information on the traffic congestion and the actual conditions on the road. So that's something under trial, and I would imagine that will go quite well and could be adapted elsewhere.
Fantastic. Veronica is asking, and possibly a question on everyone's lips, where is the data, when the data is transmitted from the vehicle, where is it stored?
Well, it's stored on servers in the cloud, so to speak, with, of course, suitable backup, and that's to enable the the multitude of web devices that can access the information with appropriate security and privacy controls, obviously. But the ability is for each user to download their data and in any form of reports that they wish, so they can store the data locally, but the conglomerated data is in servers with a backup to ensure that it doesn't fall over.
No, wouldn't want that. All right, well, we might just move on to the next stage of the presentation then.
Thank you. So I'm going to just briefly cover the infrastructure access program. It is Intelligent Access Program. I keep getting them mixed up, but it's related to infrastructure. And one thing that's often overlooked is and I touched on it earlier, is that the IAP, it does form part of a broader package of reforms developed over a decade ago. And the whole aim of these government programs was to deliver productivity, safety and compliance management outcomes. And as we heard earlier, Charles will talk about some of the compliance aspects especially. But the IAP is a nationally agreed tool available to road managers and regulators, and there's many applications for heavy vehicles. One example is for higher mass limits in New South Wales. When higher mass limits came into play over a decade ago, it was developed through the National Transport Commission, and so vehicles fitted with road-friendly suspension could actually have a higher mass limit on an axle or axle group if they met certain conditions. New South Wales didn't want to allow vehicles to have access to these higher mass limits without additional controls, and the IAP became the solution. So before 2006, only the Newell Highway was the area that allowed higher mass limits. With IAP, all of the green roads are now open to higher mass limits, and that can be quite a few tonnes of additional load per vehicle. So there's certainly productivity improvements through the use of the IAP. On top of that, Transport Certification Australia, who's the agency administering the IAP, has introduced the Entry Options Initiative, and that allows alternative in-vehicle units, including perhaps the Isuzu Telematics system that I described before, hasn't applied yet, but it could, can perhaps be used in the IAP. The in-vehicle units developed by OEMs such as Isuzu could fit into this category. What happens is that any transport operator is able to ask TCA to conduct an initial assessment of its in-vehicle technology for no cost. And over 15 in-vehicle unit types are being assessed or have been assessed by TCA. On top of that, mass management is now optionally incorporated into the IAP. So we don't just have the ability to track vehicles and to control where they go for compliance purposes. We also have the ability to have the right vehicle in the right place at the right mass, which is quite an advancement. I just wanted to wrap up by covering electronic work diaries in a little more detail. As the slide says, record keeping is mandatory in some form, but the method itself is voluntary. And if you've been in the transport industry for any length of time, particularly the long distance operators, the logbook is the bane of their existence. It's a lot of filling out, and it's prone to being filled with some errors. And then, of course, there's the compliance aspects of having to deal with the errors. And so there's got to be a better way. Electronic work diaries is perhaps that better way. What is an electronic work diary? It's an approved device. It's not a prescriptive type thing. It records work and rest declarations of the driver. It provides records for any authorised officer to review. And it provides records for the record keeper or the transport operator to review as well, which of course needs to be kept. So the usual daily work diary there, as I said, can be a bit of a pain to fill out, particularly in the manual setup. On top, but this is something that can be totally replaced by an electronic work diary with the right conditions. So the benefits, of course, are increased safety through greater compliance. Mistakes are eliminated, takes the maths out of works and rest hours, provides information and alerts, so it can alert the driver that they're about to run out of their approved driving or working hours. And of course there's a lot less administration and assurance to the customers. It's not just about the device in the truck. The management systems and follow-ups and coaching can also improve the safety and productivity for work diaries. So is there a different approach required for electronic work diaries? Well, there's a few issues that have to be worked out. The trial that was recently conducted needed to consider how small breaches, maybe in the minutes, can be handled. What percentages are the drivers allowed? The drivers are using written and electronic work diaries in the trials, which of course is potentially doubling up. And how do the records get reviewed at the roadside? If we are going to allow electronic work diaries, can it completely replace the paper diary? I would hope so, but how does that provide access to the enforcement officers? Of course, there's common data. Now, this is where it gets interesting. On the left, we have distance, location, mass, time, driver ID, and vehicle ID, all of which is available through the likes of the telematics system in the vehicle. And then you've got areas of compliance, work and rest hours, access, mass management, speed monitoring, and roadworthiness, which, of course, relate to compliance with regulations. And so you've got a national telematics framework being developed by Transport Certification Australia, which looks at combinations of regulatory applications and also productivity-based non-regulatory applications. And that's, I'm not going to go into that in great detail. Suffice to say that the purposes are merging such that perhaps one device with the appropriate controls, software, privacy, and and hardware can actually achieve the purposes of many different uses, both from a regulatory and a productivity point of view. There is a path forward, and Charles and I have been involved in something called the Telematics Industry Group, which met initially last year and has further meetings planned. And it includes representatives from the broader telematics industry, manufacturers of hardware, software and services, as well as vehicles. And I think that's a good level of interaction. It's government and industry working together to get something happening. And Transport Certification has consulted with this group to develop an in-vehicle unit specification. And that, of course, can support many, many different applications for telematics. So rather than having many devices, we come back to that vision that I talked about before, where type-approved devices, one type-approved device in a vehicle can achieve many different applications and reduce driver distraction and provide confidence in the use of those systems and their operation. So finally, we can have a compliance and enforcement framework, and Charles will cover that in much more detail. We can provide efficiency benefits, we can improve compliance, safety and productivity with telematics. In conclusion, I just wanted to say we are a very diverse market. It comes back to my comment before. We're watching with interest on the situation in the US, where the government's leading the way, and the situation in Europe, where the manufacturers are leading the way, and we're in the middle, where the Japanese manufacturers are watching either side as well. We are technology takers for many aspects of vehicles, but perhaps we do lead the way in telematics to some degree. I refer to the IAP being sold and being trialled in Sweden, for example. Telematics has a huge role to play, but programs and systems must be complementary and integrated, and we cannot ignore the OEM's developments. And of course, a single in-vehicle interface is required and must be paramount, so that we can have inputs, outputs and communications, but with many applications. So
wonderful.
We'll go to more questions.
We're actually running very short of time,
Okay.
We have had a couple of questions come through, and
Yes.
they are great questions, so thank you to those of you who asked them. Perhaps post-webinar we'll be able to address those. Please feel free to contact us. Obviously Simon's and Charles's contact details will be up on the final slide, and you can always follow up with us after the webinar. On that note, are we ready to move on? To Charles Carl, of course. Many of you are aware Charles is the National Technical Leader, and he is one of our own here at ARB. Welcome, Charles. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you,
and
Angela.
I'll let you get on with your presentation.
Thank you.
What we might do is we might skip this one. This was a little bit of a pop quiz we had, but if everyone can try and think back and maybe figure it out for themselves, we might not launch the poll, but
Sure.
we'll be.
Actually, Simon gave the answer.
He did give
one
the
of your
answer.
earlier presentation, and this was going to just check whether you.
If people were listening, that's right.
ARB is owned by all the state road agencies in Australia and New Zealand, and our head office is in Melbourne, but we have offices in most of the other capital cities. I lead two groups, network operations, which is everything to do with traffic on our roads, and freight and heavy vehicles. Simon's presentation looked at telematics from the viewpoint of the industry, from the transport operators and from drivers and from vendors, from service providers. Can you imagine from my presentation, let's look at it from the point of view of governments or regulators or people who have to manage the network and be concerned about things like safety and security. If you look at our road network, I would suggest that we have 3 stages. The first stage is where we have been building and continue to build roads, but that is getting less and less. And in the recent decade or so, I guess we are in the second stage where we are basically trying to manage whatever supply that we have. Our roads are getting more and more congested. We have more and more vehicles and more demands. Public transport, pedestrians, cyclists, and so on and so forth. And the next stage after managing supply, because there is only a limited supply, is that we will be trying to manage demand. And this is where it's more difficult, because no one of us like to be told when we can use the road and where we can go and where we cannot go and so forth. But nevertheless, in managing the network, then telematics or ITS in general provides information for the road manager in terms of how quickly the asset is wearing out, in terms of how we can manage an intersection and give priority to the ambulance or the fire service to go through that intersection, or how we can lengthen the green phase for a disabled person to cross the intersection. So all of these sensors provide us with tools so that we can manage the supply better. And increasingly, the sensors that we have will not be those by the side of the road, but from the vehicles themselves. And this is the broader perspective in terms of how governments approach telematics. Now, if you look at the applications running in a truck, then there's a whole range of commercial applications. There are personal applications. Obviously, we talk hands-free, of course, I hope. Yes. And we see the beginnings of some regulatory applications that Simon has been mentioning. And I think the important context in all of this for us to consider as I go through my presentation is, does this mean that there will be one telematics unit in the truck where it can support these 3 applications, commercial, personal, and regulatory, or will there be 2 or 3 different boxes in a truck? And if that is the case, who is going to pay for that? The physical architecture of what we have been talking about, Simon has already explained, and this chart is basically something similar. It comes from one of the service providers for the IAP program. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the physical boxes that go into the truck, and then on the right-hand side, you can see the back office system, and then on the lower left-hand side, you can see all sorts of other people that can be connected and receive the same information. So within the IAP, we are not talking about a one-size-fits-all. Government has a model within the IAP where certified service providers can provide systems, telematics, that can both work for government as well as for industry. And this is a picture of 4 service providers and the sort of service offerings that they have. Look, they're all very different. And obviously, it is the operator or the driver who finally decides which is the best business model. In terms of regulatory telematics in Australia, we mentioned earlier with the Intelligent Access Program and speed monitoring in 2008, onboard monitoring was introduced in 2010. We had an operational pilot of electronic work diaries in 2013. And just very recently, the NTC came up with a very good discussion paper on a compliance framework for heavy vehicle telematics. In the future, Simon has already mentioned the interest in government in mass distance location charging, and Simon has already mentioned about cooperative ITS. Let me lead you through a case study, a use case. The tachograph is a word that's used in Europe to monitor driving hours. So the monitoring of driving hours was in fact introduced in 1835 to monitor railway drivers. And in 1953, the monitoring of commercial vehicle driving hours in Germany was made mandatory through the form of an analog disc. So you see a paper disc here on the left-hand side of the screen. You insert it into your dashboard, and it takes note of how long and how often you drive the vehicle, and you use one disc every day. In 1985, this became mandatory across all of Europe. And in 2006, with the digital age, you no longer needed paper. It was electronic in a little smart card here that you can see where my arrow is pointing. Recently, the Americans announced a similar initiative to mandate what they call electronic logging devices for hours of service compliance. So in the US, they call it hours of service compliance, and it's again about fatigue. It's about monitoring driving hours. Here in Australia, as we've mentioned, there's been a lot of work in looking at how we can go electronic. And at the moment, the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator has been tasked with developing an implementation plan to go forward. Now, this chart that I put up here, in a way, reflects, I guess, a synthesis of all that we have discussed so far. If you look at the red row, here is the sort of data that telematics boxes produce: speed, vehicle ID, date and time, location, who is the driver, what is the mass, what is the consignment. And in the bottom half of the picture, in the blue boxes, these are all the commercial applications that operators install telematics systems for. So it's not for the data, but it's for the information. That information is available to the operator in the back office. It's available to the logistics company. It's available to the freight owner and so forth. Now, that same data that you see in the red row is also is also required for a range of compliance and monitoring applications that governments are interested in. And just to show you the next picture, this is a classic picture of how you can have quite a number of telematics boxes. So if I take you through from the left to the right-hand side of your screen, you see a Navi system circa 2008. This is a picture of a truck at the Swiss-German border. So here is a 2008 Navi system. Here is the Austrian heavy vehicle toll tag. This next box in the center of your screen is the Swiss heavy vehicle charging box. It works on GPS. This is the German heavy vehicle tolling box, and here is a rather obsolete dinosaur from 2008, a mobile phone. Let me tell you, in 2014, if you were to visit the Swiss-German border and you could peek into the inside of the truck, the two things that would have changed would be the Navi system and the phone. That'd be a smartphone or something, but these three boxes
are all the same.
Are all the same. In terms of standardization, you can quickly agree that there is certainly a need for standardization, not just in Europe, but around the world. And one of the things that Australia has led through TCA has been the development of a standard for regulated commercial freight vehicles. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see a whole series of standards that relate to the core architecture, the core technologies that are required. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the range of applications that governments all over the world are interested in, from access monitoring to driving hours, to emergency systems, to work records, to mass monitoring, to dangerous goods monitoring, and even to parking, because vehicle parking is a problem in Europe when you have to comply with driving hours. Where do you park? And sometimes you even need to book your parking spaces in advance.
Wow.
Now, the next three slides I want to show come from, I guess, I wanted to give the message that technology has changed very rapidly. This is a picture again from a conference I attended in 2008, and it shows you the state of the art technology in 2008. These are all heavy vehicle charging units. The next slide is an iPad mini that was used by, of all people, the New South Wales Police in roadside compliance and monitoring. How quickly, in 2008, the previous slide, the word smartphone or smart apps or cloud computing wasn't on my lips even. And in 6 years' time, we have moved forward so rapidly. Hence, those boxes that you saw, those telematics boxes for government, single-purpose telematics boxes, have really been outdated by the technology and how quickly it has been. And my next slide, where will we be 10 years from now? What we are seeing with Google, with autonomous cars, driverless cars, I really can't take a guess in terms of how quickly that will all happen. And what does that mean for us? This picture, I suppose, tries to encapsulate all the things that are occurring. So we have been talking about, on the left-hand side of the screen, vehicle to infrastructure. So can you imagine, in most parts of Eastern Australia, we have got toll systems. So whenever you pass underneath a gantry, you are charged.
Yes,
and
I'm familiar with that, very familiar.
So that's called vehicle to infrastructure. In order to do that, then you need to put up a lot of gantries to monitor your vehicles and to do whatever you want, compliance and whatever. Simon talked about vehicle to vehicle. So with the radar and other short-range communications, you can do vehicle to vehicle in the center of the screen. And also he mentioned something, he called it a vehicle to phone, I think, or something like that.
V2X.
V2X.
Yeah.
And I've used the word V2C, and C could mean cloud, C could mean center, C could mean back office. And really, I think in the last few years, the thing that has really exploded while we talk about V2I and V2V is V2C. Because arguably, every vehicle today is connected. I mean, there's 3 or 4 mobile phones in every vehicle. And this really has been the explosion with the smartphones, us being able to get data anytime, anywhere from a recognizable brand. Okay. And finally, just to sum up, what is the operational model for telematics? Some of the pictures I showed you before showed you many boxes. Are we talking about one box or many boxes? And is it one device that's installed by industry and being used by industry as well as government? Or does government really need another box? And who will pay for it? Yeah. And as Simon has mentioned, some of the leading work that we've done in Australia is to identify these issues. And in going forward, we will work through these issues. Yeah. And if we are successful, then it will be one common platform that can meet both personal, commercial, and government requirements. Thank you.
Thank you. I might just ask one quick question before we finish up, and thank you to everyone who stayed back. I understand that we are a few minutes over, so thank you for your patience. We've had a great question here from Callum, and I'll pose this at both our presenters here today. Have the truck drivers embraced this technology positively, or is there a resistance to Big Brother in the cab? Thoughts?
Okay, I'll start. Well, the feedback that I have heard is there's always some resistance to change, and this is obviously quite a big change. But it comes down to the classic, what's in it for me? And as far as the driver is concerned, if their life can be made easier, if their work can become more productive and more enjoyable, and they don't have to fill in things like work diaries because they have a system that can do it for them, then maybe they can accept Big Brother watching over their shoulder because they can understand that they're benefiting as well. It's still quite a major shift in the way that the industry operates, nevertheless.
I can imagine. Charles, any further thoughts on that?
I think the uptake of telematics in heavy vehicles, Simon mentioned earlier, a productivity benefit, a safety benefit, and efficiency benefit. Who is actually gaining that benefit? It is the transport operator It is the driver. It is the industry. And in some respects, there is an overlap with the community because if the truck is more efficient, if the transport operator is concerned that the driver is speeding, if the transport operator, because his business is in dangerous goods, is concerned that the driver is fatigued, then indirectly the community is also benefiting and is already benefiting.
Yes.
In terms of the driver, look at ourselves. Do we want to embrace telematics? In fact, I must confess too much because I'm sort of using my mobile phone when I'm not supposed to even. But when you start talking about monitoring and there's a big brother watching over you, I guess there are two ways of looking at it. In one sense, if drivers are being monitored, as we found out when we did the electronic work diary pilot, it does remove a lot of stress for the driver in terms of filling in the electronic work, in terms of filling in the paperwork diary.
Yes.
Because if all the records are electronic and the records show that you have reached the maximum driving hours, then really what stress is there anymore? There's no stress to lie. You just have to stop driving.
Yeah.
And in a way, there is a lot of stress when people have to fill in logbooks or timesheets, as you can imagine.
Human error, of course.
So that was one feedback that we got from industry.
Yeah.
And I think this area that we go down in terms of Big Brother, if that is the case, then we will need to have a mandated system, and then there will be an additional cost to the community.
Yes.
In my last slide, I mentioned a co-regulatory approach. And in a sense, as I said, if industry benefits in terms of better driving behavior, so there's less fuel consumption, the driver doesn't exceed his driving hours, then in fact industry is already self-regulating to some extent some of the minor breaches. And therefore, there is a role where industry can work with government so that the whole extent of compliance and enforcement can be dealt with collaboratively between industry and government. Thank you.
I think that's a great point to finish up on, actually. Thank you both for your time today and also for your time in the lead up with all your preparations. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for another webinar. We hope that you can once again join us next time. To those of you who missed the message earlier, we have recorded today's session and it will be made available to all of you here today, as well as the presentation material. So on that note, thank you very much and see you next time.